Today's recipe is for all of you pumpkin pie lovers out there. If you've been watching my videos for a while, you know that is not me. But this recipe has been highly requested, so I made it for you guys, and probably goes without saying, I employed a lot of extra taste testers to make sure it was super good. We have a buttery, short crust type of bottom that stays nice and crisp beneath the creamy, perfectly spiced pumpkin pie topping. All right, let's get started. Get your oven preheating to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. For the crust, we are going to be using a food processor, which I really think is necessary because it's such a dry, crumbly crust by design. Like, the dough is going to be very dry. While you can attempt this with a pastry cutter, if you don't have a food processor, it's just a lot more work. It's really hard to do by hand, so I will link to an alternative crust you can use that I don't like as much. It's a shortbread crust. It's not my preferred crust, but it does work well as a substitute if you don't have one of these guys. All right, all-purpose flour, you will need 2 1/3 cups or 291 grams. I'm going to pour this in to the food processor basin. We'll also be adding a 1/2 cup of firmly packed light brown sugar. That's 100 grams. Sort of sprinkle that around. Next is 1 1/2 teaspoons of cornstarch. Helps get that nice, tender, flaky crust. And a 3/4 teaspoon of table salt. Still haven't gotten my 3/4 teaspoon, so we are doing 3 1/4 teaspoons. All right, we want to get everything nicely combined here, so we're just going to do a few quick pulses just to get the ingredients nicely distributed. Next, you need 1 cup of very cold, unsalted butter. I'll usually pop this in the freezer for like 10 minutes before I use it. Cut it up into pieces. I'm just going to scatter them over the top here. Try to distribute that nicely. All right, we're going to cut the butter into the mixture, and when you're doing this, it's important that you pulse again, so don't just turn it on and blitz it or it's not going to distribute well. We're just going to do a bunch of 1-second pulses until the butter pieces are really small. This is 10 1-second pulses. Let's take a look. So hopefully you can see here, the butter is well distributed. You know, there might be some pea-sized pieces remaining, but nothing larger than that. Next, final ingredient for the crust, we need 2 tablespoons of heavy cream. I'm just going to drizzle this over top, and once again, we're going to pulse. So we want this mixture to stay nice and sandy. That's actually going to be critical for getting the proper texture and making it easy to put into our pan. So we're just going to do a couple of pulses again, 1-second pulses. Okay, so I'm checking this at like 15 1-second pulses, and as you can see, it's still pretty sandy looking, very crumbly, but if we take some of the dough and press it between our fingers, our thumb and our forefinger, it is clinging together very nicely and very easily. This is the prime texture you're looking for. You don't want to go too far with this. All right, let me see if I can get this off of the food processor. Let's go ahead and remove the blade. We are using a 13x9 baking dish. I recommend a metal one. Everything is going to bake nicer in a metal one. Glass or ceramic, you're going to have a softer crust. Everything is going to need longer in the oven, so just a heads up on that. I have lined this with parchment paper, and I recommend you do the same because it's just going to make removing and slicing a lot easier. Let's go ahead and put our crumbly mixture right in here. Looks super sandy. It's supposed to. Trust me, this is much harder if everything is, you know, like a typical cookie dough. It's not supposed to look like that. We're just going to take our spoon, press it into an even layer as much as we can. And then one little trick I like to do, and I do this with my millionaire shortbread as well, is sometimes I'll just take a piece of wax paper, and I'll just lay it over top, and I'll use my hands to press in the dough. Or if I'm worried about making it too hot with my hands, I can use the spoon over the paper. We're just going to press this into an even layer and just firmly pressed in. All right, let's take a look. Ta-da! Once you have a nice even layer, we're going to take this over to our 350 degree Fahrenheit oven. It's going to bake on the center rack for about 25 to 30 minutes. Usually I need like 28, but I always recommend starting a little earlier just so it doesn't burn. You want this to be a nice golden brown color on top, especially around the edges. While the crust is cooking, let's go ahead and prepare our pumpkin pie topping. Now, this is pretty much the same recipe that I used for my pumpkin pie. Tried a couple variations, but ended up realizing it was best to stick with the tested, proven favorite version. I'm really glad I did. This recipe uses a whole 15 ounce can of pumpkin puree. Do not grab the pumpkin pie filling, which is sold right next to the puree. The only ingredient on your can should be pumpkin. Pumpkin puree, 15 ounces. It's like 425 grams. Drop that in a mixing bowl. Next, you need 3/4 cup or 150 grams of firmly packed light brown sugar, and then 1 1/2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. All right, next are spices. Instead of just using pumpkin pie spice, I like to kind of make my own blend. This is one thing that really makes this pumpkin pie topping really pop and really stand out. The spice blend is just perfection, if I do say so myself. So that's 1 3/4 teaspoon of ground cinnamon, 3/4 teaspoon of ground ginger, 1/2 teaspoon of ground allspice, 1/2 teaspoon of ground nutmeg, and then 1/2 teaspoon of table salt, which I I need to refill this guy. All right, go ahead and mix all of these ingredients together before we add anything else in here. Should be smelling pretty amazing right about now, which is nothing compared to how it's going to smell when it's in the oven. Make sure the spices are nicely distributed. All right, next up we're adding eggs. We're going to be adding 3 large eggs. So pumpkin pie, like cheesecake, you want to be careful about over mixing once you get to the point of adding the eggs. So I recommend adding them one at a time. We're going to lightly beat them. I wanted to say lightly scramble, but one time I said lightly scramble the egg before adding it, and someone thought that meant like cook scrambled eggs and then put that in the cheesecake batter, so try not to say that anymore. There's one, lightly beaten. And the reason we don't want to overmix is because over mixing the eggs at this stage can cause the, I wanted to say cheesecake, it can cause the pumpkin pie layer to puff and crack, which we don't want. So here's number 2. This is my favorite little whisk. This is my favorite kitchen tool. It's just so sleek. And I would definitely recommend you use a spatula for this step, or at least don't use an electric mixer or a stand mixer for incorporating the eggs. Egg number 3. My chickens are starting to slow down and not give me eggs, which is really depressing because I'm feeding those girls some really nice quality feed, and when they're not giving me any eggs, it's a little painful. I have to buy eggs from the grocery store while still feeding my chickens. All right, once those eggs are nicely combined, we're going to add our last ingredient for the topping, which is 1 cup of heavy cream. Go ahead and drizzle this in. Don't go crazy with the mixing, but you do want everything nicely incorporated, and you want it to be nice and uniform. My husband used to be the ultimate pumpkin dessert taste tester, but he doesn't eat sugar anymore, so it makes my life a lot harder. All right, this looks perfect. It smells amazing, even though I don't like pumpkin, but our crust still has a couple minutes in the oven. As soon as that comes out, we can add the topping. All right, this actually took a little less than 25 minutes in my new oven. You guys know I have the smaller oven, so they tend to cook things a little faster. Know your oven. So you can hopefully see we've got some nice golden browning on top. That's what you want to see. That's what's going to keep the crust from getting soggy, and it will keep it nice and stable. So you don't really have to let this cool a whole bunch. Since our topping, filling, whatever you want to call it, is done, I'm just going to go ahead and pour this over top. And of course, we are going to scrape this. We don't want to leave any of that filling behind. Just gonna give this a little swirl. Try to make it a nice even layer. Oh, and one thing I forgot to mention is after you pull the crust out of the oven, you want to drop your oven temperature down to 325 degrees Fahrenheit. It's only going to take a minute or 2 to get it down to that temperature, but you do want the temperature dropped. Otherwise, your pie topping is a lot more likely to crack. So my oven's at 325. Once your oven's actually reached that temperature, we're going to return it to the center rack. It's going to need to bake for about 25 to 30 minutes. What I want to see when it's finished baking is a really, really slight jiggle in the center. The edges are mostly set, just a very slight jiggle. You can also test it the way you would a classic pumpkin pie, where you take a sharp knife and start it in the center. If it comes out clean, it's done. This does smell amazing. You've got all your cozy spices. Looks perfect. You can't dig in right away. One thing about pumpkin pie and pumpkin pie bars is they're going to need to cool. They're super hot now. Let them sit at room temperature for like an hour or so until they're not super warm to the touch. Then pop them in the fridge. They're going to need to chill in the fridge for usually at least 4 hours before you can really dig in. This is a great dessert to make, you know, the night before an event. I didn't want to make you wait the 4 to 6 hours, so I prepped a batch of these bars last night. Parchment paper should make it nice and easy for me to lift them out of the pan. That just makes cutting a lot easier. And that's gonna be pretty easy to clean. Now go ahead and cut these into individual squares before you serve. I'll do a couple of slices here. I'm so bad at doing straight cuts. Let's see how we do. Just cut a couple of them. And then I'll take some pictures for the blog. All right, let's go grab one. And there you have it. These cute little handheld pumpkin pie bars. Crust should be nice and crisp on the bottom. Really, really pairs well with like that smooth topping. And one way you can get me to eat pumpkin pie is if you top it with whipped cream. I'm going to highly recommend my homemade whipped cream. I'll link to that in the recipe. Pumpkin lovers, I really, really, really want to hear what you think about this recipe. Even though I'm not a pumpkin pie person, I'm very confident in it, and it's gotten nothing but rave reviews. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Time for the taste test. Honestly, it is the best pumpkin pie bar I've ever tasted. That's what I was aiming for. I love that crust. With enough whipped cream, anything's good.